And we are going live. Live.
Outside.
Our Thursday hangout is beginning again with Parks Inspiring Solutions, and we're chatting here with Jim Barborak, a longtime colleague, and boy, we've never met face to face, and this is the closest we've come, Jim. This is great. Don't tell me you froze.
It's a pleasure to be here.
Don't tell me you froze. Okay, good. Can you introduce yourself? Where are you, and who are you, and what are you doing?
Sure. I'm Jim Barborak. I'm from the United States state of Ohio, but most of my professional career over the past few decades, I spent living and working in Latin America. For the past 5 years, I've served as co-director of the Center for Protected Area Management at Colorado State University, but working primarily internationally and with a focus on Latin America on parks and protected area issues. Right now I am at CATIE, C-A-T-I-E, which is a regional university and research center in Costa Rica. I'm one of the coordinators of its 35th annual one-month short course on protected area management, which includes some material on tourism and public use in protected areas, which is, to our knowledge, the longest continuous running international short course for protected area managers. We have a fine group of 14 professionals from 5 countries in Central and South America here with us, and tomorrow, or the day after, I'm sorry, we're going to be visiting this country's most visited national park, Poás Volcano. It's a pilot park, one of its first national parks that's highly developed and gets over 300,000 visitors a year.
Wow. All right, now you've been working and living in Costa Rica for years now. What have we seen in the past 20 years? What are the big changes in Costa Rican parks?
Well, I actually go back further than that. I first came here for a conservation course at the same institution, but as a student 37 years ago when I was at the time a Peace Corps volunteer in Honduras. And Costa Rica was already beginning to make news as a conservation leader 40 years ago. And so what I've seen over that period of time is how a country which was off the go trail, as they say, it was not on anyone's radar as an important international tourism destination, has dramatically changed. The pioneers and founders of the park system, including a gentleman named Mario Boza, whose master's thesis at this same university was a master plan for Poás National Park under the guidance of Kenton Miller, famous international protected area specialist, way back in the early 1970s. He and his other founding colleague, Alvaro Gali, have no idea that when they were drawing lines on maps in the early 1970s that they would spawn $1 billion industry in a country of just 5 million people today. So the change in the number of tourists, in the importance of tourism, nature-based tourism to the national economy, and in the sophistication of the conservation agencies, government ones, NGOs, and the tourism sector has evolved tremendously to the point where tourism is one of the pillars of the country's economy. Everyone wants to learn English today for both that reason and for other reasons. And the country has attracted incredible investment both in the tourism sector and the conservation sector as it became more famous for converting a quarter of the country into parks and reserves and becoming very user-friendly in developing facilities in its national parks and also more so in the buffer zones around them. In other words, the national parks do not have hotels in them, do not have, for the most part, restaurants. They have trails and signs, but most of the actual physical development has taken place in the buffer zones, spawned primarily by Costa Rican entrepreneurs and foreign residents.
Now, so none of the parks have a hotel or restaurant inside the park boundaries?
No, and many of them don't even have camping facilities. The focus from the very beginning, and a key thing here is that Costa Rica is the size of the U.S. state of West Virginia. It's only 51,000 square kilometers. It's a small country. All but one of its parks are under 60,000 hectares. And so they're not remote areas where you need to fly in and spend numerous days to visit one park. which might be the case in the Amazon, for example. Most of these parks that are highly visited are within just a few hours of the capital city and major areas that have good hotel infrastructure. So in a small country like that, in an island or a small continental country like Costa Rica, there's not as much pressure to actually develop the overnight facilities or even things like souvenir shops and restaurants within the parks themselves, because most are day use areas, and most of that development has taken place in the buffer zones for the welfare and benefit of surrounding communities.
Beautiful, beautiful. What about this year's cadre of students? They're coming from other Latin American countries. What are some of their impressions of Costa Rica? Is it what they were expecting?
For the most part, they've not been here. Most of them are actually from Peru and Ecuador, two countries that are making major new investments in their protected area system. And they're looking to Costa Rica for leadership. This country has been much more successful in spite of its small size in attracting donations, outside percentage of grants from bilateral, multilateral agencies, GEF, US, AID, the German government, etc. So I'd say that they're wanting to learn is how to be more successful in conservation finance. They were also surprised to hear that in spite of the fact that Costa Rica gets so much foreign assistance, it gets it in large part because its government has invested so much in conservation, buying out most of the private lands within their national parks, something most of their neighbors haven't done. And so today, in spite of its reputation as attracting all this international investment, Costa Rica generates 80% of the budget for its protected area system from the national budget. Now, granted, a good percentage of this comes from entrance fees that visitors pay to parks, but this is not Rwanda. People aren't paying $600 a day either. And the other thing is, and I think this is one of the greatest things about Costa Rica's system, in spite of all this fame as being an international tourism destination, even today, about half of the visitors to the national parks are Costa Ricans. If you're a middle class or upper class Costa Rican, visiting the national parks is something that people have become accustomed to doing. And so that was another thing that surprised the folks here, is how many locals visit their parks. And I think the other thing is that was part of the different pillars of Costa Rica's success, and we'll be seeing this on field trips, is how important it was to have a open doors policy and user-friendly policy toward international researchers. Many of the national parks in Costa Rica, long before they became famous as tourism destinations, became famous as sites for ecological research, places like the La Selva Biological Research Station, Santa Rosa National Park, Corcovado National Park. And I always say that backpackers and student groups and researchers are often the vanguard, the first arrivals in the evolution of protected areas and natural areas in general as tourism destinations. And so they pretty much put Costa Rica on the map through documentaries, through research reports, and that was basically the tip of the iceberg of what has evolved into a billion-dollar industry.
That's beautiful. Are we seeing kind of any sort of other positive developments in Central America along those lines?
You know, it's a tough region to work in right now, and the reasons it's tough to work in aren't so much conservation reasons. They have to do with governance issues and narco trafficking. Northern Central America, Honduras, El Salvador, Guatemala, those countries have just about the highest homicide rate on the planet right now. And so certainly not places where most people think about going. It's amazing that in spite of that, within those countries, there are still tourism destinations that get hundreds of thousands of foreign visitors a year, such as Tikal National Park in Guatemala, the Honduran Bay Islands, for example, as well. And so people are still visiting the parks, but in general, that's not been good for either investment in conservation or investment in tourism. And so tourism numbers have not risen like they have in Costa Rica. On the other hand, I think that Belize has a very different model than Costa Rica of conservation. Most of their protected areas are co-managed by nonprofit organizations, particularly the Belize Audubon Society, which manages 9 of their government parks, and also by community organizations, indigenous and coastal Creole communities that co-manage a number of the national parks and forests. So they followed a different governance model than Costa Rica, which is basically a government-dominated model. However, they've done quite good in attracting international tourists. There are major cruise ship stop right now. Most of those cruise ship visitors, or many of them, unlike other countries, actually get off the ships to go to protected areas, archaeological and natural, which are near the cruise port. And the other thing that I really like about Belize is how they had foresight many years ago to attach a tax on all tourism arrivals by cruise ship, by plane, and by land. And they created a national protected areas conservation trust with a public-private board that reinvest what those people pay, which is just several dollars per visitor. And this has provided a huge boon of funding locally generated revenue for investments in protected areas, and part of the money also goes to training local communities to be better tourism entrepreneurs.
No, I was attending the conference, the Responsible Tourism Conference in Belize a couple of years ago, and one of the questions I have is the language again. You know, what words are the government officials using? What words are the travelers using? Are we talking about responsible tourism? Are we talking about ecotourism? What's the vocabulary de jour where you are?
I hear all of those terms used interchangeably and often without definitions. Sustainable, equitable, eco. There's just a variety of expressions used, and I've heard very sterile arguments about that's true ecotourism. No, this is true ecotourism. I try to stay away from those arguments and basically try to find places where we can apply the triple bottom line, make sure that tourism growth is tied to investments in conservation, and that as the Convention on Biological Diversity urges countries to conserve biodiversity, to research to make sure you know what you've got, and to use it wisely for the benefit and with the direct involvement of the communities that live in and around these protected areas. One thing in Latin America, which is true in much of the developing world, is that Costa Rica is an exception in that case. Most countries' protected area systems are dominated by areas that have people living not just around them, but living in them. And so responsible tourism, inclusive tourism, pro-poor tourism, all of these phrases express, I believe, directions in which we need to go. There is a Costa Rican tourism entrepreneur that actually patented the word ecotourism decades ago. He was in the forefront of seeing something coming down the pike. But I really think that we should not get stuck on definitions and rather look toward guiding principles such as those of the Global Sustainable Tourism Accords and try to think more about what is good environmentally friendly, socially friendly, sustainable tourism, providing benefits to parks and the local communities, rather than to get stuck on definitions of what is good and what is bad and which term best indicates the type of tourism we're trying to achieve.
I hear you. I hear you. Are you a member of the TAPAS group?
Yes, I am a member of the TAPAS group, of the Tourism and Protected Areas group within the World Protected Areas Commission, of which I've been proud to be a member for now about 35 years.
My goodness, my goodness. And I assume you're on the TAPAS group within LinkedIn?
Yes, I am.
Oh, very good. We were chatting a little bit.
Announcing our Colorado State University short course and seminars on tourism protected areas, obviously.
Excellent, excellent. Yeah, we were, I was contacted by Anna Spenceley a couple of years ago, and she asked if I would help out with communication. I said, well, of course I would. And are you ready for it? And we were chatting beforehand. Everyone wants to be engaged, but no one wants to do anything. So the big hope here is that we have these hangouts on a regular basis, and we ask people, we have one viewer right now, so the audience can submit questions, we'll answer them. But the archived videos here on Google Plus Hangouts, and then YouTube, I found, reach around 100 people or so. If we can do this on a regular basis, I think we can make a pretty strong case for tourism in protected areas, and doing what's right and doing what's good, and also avoiding what's bad. There are a number of cases where the park department is under considerable pressure to boost tourism through various means, whether it's by putting some sort of a cable car through a protected area, or by building a hotel in a protected area, and again, kind of pressuring lawmakers to change the laws just so that that would happen. My hope is that if we could have these conversations and see that there is not a one-size-fits-all model, that we can actually have a conversation about what works and what works where. In terms of education, it's great you're doing the short course, and we just have to find ways of getting the word out about that and other educational opportunities that are out there.
Right, and I think you mentioned something very important. I stress to, for example, the students that are here now, the importance of pragmatism, and to be careful about getting on a holy pulpit, as we say in the United States, of getting up on a pedestal and preaching, being not open to compromise, to discussion, to open debate about what might be appropriate or not. I mentioned, for example, that in Costa Rica, for the most part, the policy is to limit overnight accommodations and restaurants and souvenir shops to the very minimum, and only within a few of the most visited parks. What they do have lots of nice trails, including now for the first time universal trails accessible to even the blind and the handicapped. I was in a protected area 3 days ago. There are only important archaeological monuments where they're building one as well, Guayaba National Monument. Having said that, there are huge protected areas around the world, particularly in remote areas, where building hotels, building restaurants might be appropriate within a different reality, areas that are very remote. And also, as I've had the opportunity to work with Anna Spenceley in the case of Mozambique in Africa, there are many times when this can provide tremendous economic benefits to communities if they are full partners, and where we have partnerships between the government, nonprofits, tourism entrepreneurs that are willing to reach out and partner with communities and the communities themselves, not just as cheap labor, but as full partners in over the long term in these types of enterprises. So I think that we have to be pragmatic, we have to be flexible, we have to understand that what's right for one country, for one park, may not be appropriate for another, and at times be flexible, pragmatic, and look for the good of the parks we love and cherish, and also for the welfare of the communities that depend on them and live around them.
Beautiful, beautiful. As we go into these conversations throughout the rest of 2014, there is a big conference I know you're attending in Sydney, Australia, and that's the World Parks Congress, November 12th to the 20th of this year. Have you attended a prior World Parks Congress, and what do you expect from this year's event?
Well, although I don't have the gray hair that I should at my age, this will be my fourth, if I remember right. I was at one in 1982 in Bali, Indonesia, 1992 in Caracas, Venezuela, 2003 in Durban, and yes, so I'll be one of the senior kind of individuals there, and one of maybe less than 100 individuals who have been to 4 of these, and I've seen them evolve. The first one I went to in Bali in 1982 was the first held in a developing country. The first and second ones were held in the Western United States in 1962 and 1972. So it was called the Third World Parks Congress, and it really was held in the Third World, very appropriate, in Bali in Indonesia. And it was a relatively small gathering of only 400 people, reflecting the face of conservation at the time. Even though it was held in a developing country, most of the participants were from developed countries, and most of them were men. At the conference in 1992 in Caracas, a much larger event, and the faces started to change. There were many more women and a balance of participants from developed and developing countries. By the time we got to Durban in 2003, I'd say the vast majority of individuals present were from developing countries, and not just they were present. If you looked at the titles of the sessions, if you listened to the discourse, if you looked at the recommendations, they were recommendations coming from an audience of people primarily from countries that were developing and concerned about issues of the South, and those of us from the developed North playing, I wouldn't say a spectator role, but where we had ceded leadership over the fate of protected areas and most of the biodiversity of the world to the countries where that actually exists, which is in the tropics.
So what are you expecting from the event in Australia?
Well, first of all, I think it's going to be an interesting challenge for our host in Australia, because Australia, under its current government, there have been a number of decisions the government has made. For example, in one of the states, allowing sport hunting in parks. Not something I'm against in principle. I myself am a sport hunter and fisherman, but not necessarily in national parks. They have pushed back on some of their plans to expand their marine protected area system. There is a controversy going on the next 10 days at the global meeting of the World Heritage Convention over the announced intention of the government of Australia to reduce the size of the Tasmanian World Heritage Site. And there are also issues on which it's under fire regarding the management of the Great Barrier Reef. And so I think it will be an interesting balancing act. I'm very happy that we're doing in Australia for the federal government and some of their state governments over some recent moves and policies by government that many in the conservation community consider to be a step back in regards to environmental responsibility. So there's going to be that national drama, which there always is whenever there's an international event. Just like this happened in Jeju, South Africa, at the last IUCN General Assembly over the issues of construction nearby of military bases with support from the United States. So there's always a local drama even when you have a global event. Aside from that, I think we will see a continuation of the trends that we saw at Caracas and then at Durban regarding much attention being paid to the needs of protected areas in the developing world where most people live, where most biodiversity is, and where most growth in the global protected area system is currently occurring, particularly in the marine realm. Here in Costa Rica, they just created a new marine management area of 9,000 hectares. That's nearly 40% of the land area of Costa Rica and a huge chunk of its exclusive economic zone. So we're seeing a lot more attention being paid to freshwater conservation and to coastal marine conservation, a lot more attention to diverse forms of governance, more inclusive of the needs of local communities, including indigenous peoples. I think we're going to hear a lot more about innovative finance. I think that tourism will be discussed throughout. There will be many diverse views on it, from individuals that see it as a threat, to other individuals see it as absolutely vital to engaging the public and decision makers and showing the economic benefit from conservation. So I think it will be a wonderful gathering of a few thousand souls with very diverse views regarding protected areas and very diverse views regarding the place of tourism within protected area management.
Perfect. What a great preview of that event. Yeah, I'm looking forward to finding out what's happening. I'm going to be here in sunny Las Vegas, Nevada, watching from afar and urging people on in terms of making as much of the event accessible via the internet as possible. I was attending the planning meeting in Cuernavaca, Morelos, and for family reasons, I'm here and very pleased to be here in Nevada. And one of the questions that kind of came up, and it kind of divided our planning group, was the role of live streaming video. And one of the ideas was that, well, you're just broadcasting and you're letting people just see what's happening. And thank goodness it wasn't just me saying, no, it has to be much more interactive. In other words, you have to be able to receive and interact with people. in conversations that we had in the private planning meeting about translation. The cost of translating a session can be, quite expensive. And I was saying, the fact is that if you can take a camera into any of these workshops or any of these rooms, and if you can do a live stream, if you think it through and if you plan it out, if you have a live stream, somebody in the background, somebody in another country, whether it's Finland or Chicago, Illinois, or Ecuador, whatever, they could be doing a transcription in real time, or doing a translation in real time. In other words, instead of costing some $20,000 or $30,000 to do a translation feed in Russian, if you have the video, we could be much more creative, and we could be using the internet in the way that it really should be used, which is not just broadcasting or webcasting, one-to-many, but really involving people and getting people to work together. I mean, we'll see what happens. And I told the folks at the planning meeting that, again, to count on my full support, and that, again, we would be doing these hangouts, and we'll just see how well they make use of these technologies.
I think that it's very important. I think we should be cognizant that 99.99% of people involved in protected area management in the world will not be able to go to Sydney. However, what transpires there will affect the future of protected area management. What came out of the Durban Congress in just 11 years ago basically set the stage for the program of work on protected areas of the Convention on Biological Diversity that was agreed on just a few months later, basically based on the recommendations of Durban. So these are very important events for determining the future course of policy and action globally regarding protected areas. And my hope is that what transpires in Sydney is broadcast and shared as widely as possible with that vast audience of individuals who cannot go, and also shared with that majority of humanity that does not speak English. So I think that there are two challenges. One is to get the word out, and the other is to find ways to get it out to what I call the men and women in the trenches, the rangers. I work a lot with rangers who do not get nearly the respect and recognition that they should. So those kind of people are still going to be out there patrolling. They're still going to be out there interpreting for visitors and assisting scientists. And most of these individuals working in the trenches will not be able to go. But I hope that that does not mean that they not have access to the deliberations and results that arise from the Congress in Sydney next November.
You're here. I agree again with you. Let's wind up this conversation. Are there anything else? Are there any other points that you'd like to make during this particular hangout?
I'd first like to commend you, Ron, on the important work you're doing to use social media and new technology to try to increase the reach of the discussions of those of us that are active in the World Commission on Protected Areas and its Tourism and Protected Areas Working Group. If I might, I'd just like to make one plug, which is that we at Colorado State University Center for Protected Area Management are going to be holding our second annual mobile seminar on tourism and protected areas, which is a 16-day event in the western United States with absolutely spectacular itinerary beginning in Rocky Mountain National Park in Colorado, winding through the Black Hills of the Dakotas, and ending in Yellowstone and Teton National Parks in Montana and Wyoming again. Last year we had a wonderful group of people from every continent but Antarctica sharing their own experience and reflecting on the different ways we saw tourism being managed in local, private, state, and federal protected areas, both categories 1 to 3, strictly protected parks and reserves, and also extractive reserves. And so I urge those of you that are interested to contact me and to get more information about that event as the application period is about to come to an end.
And when you say mobile seminar, you mean it's all on the cell phone?
Haha. No, not that kind of mobile. Mobile meaning we basically are on the road. We visit 10 U.S. National Park Service units and a number of U.S. forest plus state and private reserves and municipal parks and reserves to look at all types of tourism, from sites visited like Yellowstone and Rocky Mountain by millions of visitors a year to small pocket parks and urban and state parks receiving levels of visitation more typical of developing countries in the hundreds to thousands of visitors a year, and looking at all different types of visitation of the visitor activities and infrastructure and governance, outfitters, concessionaires, and the like.
All right, and the dates of that again?
September 10th to 25th.
Okay, we'll talk a little bit more about that, and after we conclude, and I'll ask you to please post a link on our event page, and we'll make sure that we get the word out.
I would be happy to.
Jim, what a pleasure to meet you for the first time through the magic of the internet.
We've been emailing and phoning for, I think, about 20 years.
20 years, indeed. Ever since that Honduras book came up, all those years ago. Well, very good. Thank you for your time and for your passion in this field. And we will continue these conversations, and I hope you can be a part of it.
Thank you for having me.